thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. Yeah, these things happen. It's been fun doing a lot of podcasts because you never know what's going to happen.
Technical difficulties can be exhilarating.
Occasionally. Well, so yeah, let's so tell us a bit about yourself and what led you to becoming into Jediism. What made you get into it?
Well, nothing made me get into it. I just wanted to. There was a time about 10 years ago where I was becoming a bit, I don't know, frustrated or bored in life, and I already had a lot of background in, studying things like philosophy and different, I hesitate to use the word spiritual, but for lack of a clearer term, well then, spiritual foundations. I'd studied religions sort of as a satellite field of study, and was just sort of going along and realized that I had this, I was comfortable, but then I sort of had this existential hole I wasn't really, doing anything with. And so when I noticed that the Temple of the Jedi Order had among their initial studies, well then I saw there was the power of myth, the interviews that Bill Moyers did with Joseph Campbell back in 1987. And I had seen those when they were first aired on the American PBS. So seeing as how that was in and among the initial studies, along with Alan Watts, along with Krishnamurti, and things they'd already had some experience with, well then I thought, well, this would probably be a good way to go. And so I did that, and I've just kept at it ever since.
What so effectively what was it in particular that made Jedi, so is the interview with that really that interview really had an influence on you, but what was said specifically that really registered in here and made you decide, right, I really want to give this thing a go?
Well, that's that's a deep question, because there wasn't really anything in particular about those interviews, which I had by that time known for 20 years. I'd known about them, I'd seen them, occasionally over that span of time. It was basically the knowledge that I already came to the Temple of the Jedi Order with, about how popular culture has to be based on things which are already a part of our collective mythology. And when I saw that this group was founded on that, well then I thought, well, I sort of belong here, and I've been there ever since. And that having that foundation before helped a lot, and it also helps me help other people who have never had any experience with it, which is, that's sort of what I do in the temple. It's my job to guide people along in their studies and sort of oversee, how they're learning things like that, how they're learning, about the Force, which, as I said before, was, the Force, it's undefinable. I can't tell you what it is. It's, just something bigger than me. Now, that also is something that Joseph Campbell talks about with Bill Moyers. But then he has to do it in the framework that it already exists. How it's been done all throughout, human history, is we have a symbolic imagination. And so when we're trying to describe these intangible, totally not concrete principles, well, then we have to kind of give a face to them. And that's what all the characters in myth are. That's what all the gods of every pantheon are. And that's what the characters in our popular culture are, whether it be Star Wars or Harry Potter or, Doctor Who or, Sherlock or whatever, what have you. It's all based on the same thing. It's all the way we try to make sense of the world. It's what gives us a narrative framework. So that's what brought me into Jediism. It wasn't necessarily Jediism in and of itself, but it's just an avenue through which, I can explore, my existential landscape, and where I can, help others do the same.
And what are so there's 3 tenets, right, in Jediism, and there's the 21 Maxims, right?
Yes.
Could you elaborate on what they are and what they mean to you?
Well, the 3 tenets is, knowledge, wisdom. Those are principles. They're overarching principles. And the maxims are basically a way to cut down everything we find in ethics. They're just principles, virtues that we aspire to. Now, with the entire doctrine of the Temple of the Jedi Order, I cannot insist enough about the fact that I cannot speak for every Jedi group. But with ours, the entire doctrine is not prescriptive. We don't tell people this is how you must behave. We describe ideals, virtues that we can aspire to, all the while knowing we'll never be able to live ideally. And if you think about it, in either classical mythology or even in what we find in popular culture, none of these characters are completely virtuous. I mean, if you want to completely virtuous, well, then you're going to have to use a 1960s situational comedy. That's, it's totally unreal. For us, the maxims are merely virtuous ideals. We keep them in mind when we approach particular situations, and much of the time, perhaps more often than not, we forget. And that's why we have to keep coming back to it. It's something that Alan de Botton wrote about when he was writing about religion in his book Religion for Atheists. Is that we're kind of addicted in our postmodern culture to novelty. We always want something new, but that's not the way pedagogy happens. Pedagogy happens when we repeat things, and as it were, with things which are only intangible principles, we have to repeat them quite often because we don't remember. And that's part of what we do also, is repeat things.
So, and one thing I do want to ask, how would you, so what's the organization of Jediism like across the world and in terms of the UK? Is there, and what are the bodies that run everything? And
I can only describe the way that we do, and that is in the Temple of the Jedi Order. When we've got our council, which is just an administrative body. We keep the lights on, keep the server running, keep the, and we do make some, administrative decisions, regarding, conflict resolution. Below that, we've got, well, not below that, but apart from that, well, then we have the Knights Court, which is just the body of all the knights of our temple. And they're the ones who are responsible for, creating lessons, for guiding apprentices to knighthood, for deciding whether or not someone is, ready to be dubbed a knight. There's a very clever IP team, which it's run by one of the apprentices, a good one actually, and what they do is they help initiates, study you know, the initiate's program, to become initiated into what it is to live as a Jedi, to get them ready for being an apprentice. Other than that, it's just, you know, an extensive member pool that, you know, we hang out and we talk to one another, and, you know, sometimes we talk about what it's like to be a Jedi, and sometimes we just talk about anything that you would hear people talk about in the tube. You know, it's not a very rigorous environment. It takes a lot of rigor, and it takes a lot of personal dedication to live according to principle. But then it's not to make us anything superhuman. It's just to get us up to being, you know, relatively nice human beings.
Okay, and so I hear that in Jediism, a big part of it is including exercise and mental health, and like they're all one. So is that included within the church as a whole, that you exercise a lot?
It's very highly encouraged. And yes, I'm in the gym at least 5 days a week. But then that's, as with any religion, whether it be, you know, Jediism or Buddhism or Taoism or Christianity for that matter, well then one ought to take care of one's body because it's the only one we have. You know, this is the body's temples, because, you know, we can't really interact with those, with, you know, the immensity of life, you know, that is, you know, the thing bigger than me, which is of course, if our bodies are decrepit and decaying and falling apart. So yeah, so the physical health and the maintenance of physical health is a very important part of what we do.
And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of misconceptions, and you said earlier that the most stupid thing you get is people saying, "Oh, can you lift the car?" or "Do you do lightsaber stuff?" and all that. And what are your typical responses if someone asks, "Could you lift this car for me?"
I ask them if they can, but it's especially whenever I ask them why they would want to do that, or why they would want to be able to do that, or why they want me to. And what it generally boils down to is they want something that they can see. They want some sort of external sign. And that's, well, that's it sort of goes, I don't know how much philosophy you've ever studied, but, you know, Jean Baudrillard wrote, you know, about the procession of simulacra. And what all that is, even the desire to do telekinesis, it's just wanting there to be a projection of some outward sign that this thing is true, which that outward sign is something they recognize from popular culture, or even from literature or whatever, from some film. That's not the way it is. The Jedi in the films were portrayed as being able to practice telekinesis, or being able to, you know, run really fast, or having these superhuman characteristics. But that's not new. A lot of heroes in classical mythology, over you know, in all, you know, human stories, there's some kind of supernatural, you know, thing going on there. And well, with the nature of supernature, well then it's beyond our capabilities. Why would someone want, you know, why would somebody want to either be able to do telekinesis, or to be able to see it, or telepathy, or, you know, all those things that, you know, we don't know if they're true or not, but I can't do it, and that isn't particularly important to whether or not I can live up to the principles with that.
If someone could do those things, it would be very hard for them not to do it for the wrong reasons.
The things that we can do. it is very hard for us not to do those things for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, but it would make it worse. So they say that power corrupts, absolutely.
Yes, and it doesn't even have to be absolute power. Someone given, you know, a power that they can't have taken away from them, and they're probably going to use it. They're going to be at least tempted to use it for you know, dodgy things. It's like Plato's The Ring of Ages.
The Ring of Jesus, did you say?
No, the Ring of Ages. In Plato, the ring that would make one invisible. It was found by just a shepherd, and he wound up killing the king and stealing his wife. Because a ring that makes you invisible, you can do anything you want to, and no one's going to be able to blame you.
Hmm.
Well, that can be used for any sort of, you know, supernatural power. You know, a power which is supernatural is going to probably lead to, you know, dodgy behavior. And that is just supported by the fact that the things that we can do, we often abuse them.
Yeah.
So it's a cautionary story. It's a cautionary feature of a lot of stories that when one does have power, one has to be quite responsible with.
One thing I want to ask is, have you seen the documentary of The American Jedi?
I don't know if I've seen the whole thing or not. And if I did, I watched it once, and it was probably not impressive. It's I have, I think, 2 apprentices who took part in that. And well, there are the American Jedi documentary was not merely based on the Temple of the Jedi Order. It was based on a lot of different Jedi groups, a lot of people from a lot of different Jedi groups. And, you know, I know some of them, and, you know, they're all right people. We have a little bit different uptakes on things. But I don't think it's a documentary that needed to be made.
What? Why would you say that?
Well, because that's something that I've tried to teach all of my apprentices, is that we don't do any of the things that we do because we are Jedi. We are Jedi because we hold to the principles that we hold, which compel us to do what we do. Very often, seeing as a lot of sort of Jedi come from Taoism, well, then we also value non-action, not having to do something about something which we consider unacceptable. It quite often works itself out. And that's one of the things that it's one of the things that are the most difficult to accept is, you know, we're often trained to be proactive, but, you know, whereas it is good to be proactive in many situations, in many more, it's better just to leave things alone. We ought not just, you know, become alarmed and jump up and think that we have to fix something. It may not be broken. We don't have necessarily a complete enough perspective to know, you know, what it's connected to, what are the variables that are creating this situation. It's best to, it doesn't mean doing nothing either. It just means no inappropriate action, no precipitated action. Don't jump whenever you can just, you know, get a good feel, first of all, for what's really going on, and then be able to act in such a way that, you know, is much more effective than, you know, jumping in where angels fear to tread and then discovering why angels fear to tread there.
Yeah. It's, and what's so in a nutshell, you're saying, you know, people know that that exists, and they know the base. You're saying that people know a little bit of what it's about, and that's why it didn't need to be made, or?
I'm thinking that it's probably best that one does not we do what we do because it's the thing to do. And that's the thing that would characterize a Jedi. Just the belief and the faith and the force, and doing what is right in front of one to do, rather than having this elaborate ritual system where, okay, I'm doing this because I am a Jedi. No, I am a Jedi Knight. It is merely, a qualification that I have lived up to, rather than a qualification that I have because I did particular things, extraneous to holding those principles and, rising to those occasions where I need to be responsible. I said we don't necessarily need to say that we're a Jedi. It's going to, I think, be more confusing than anything else for the general public, because they're going to see that as portraying a character from a film rather than someone living up to a set of principles that have been around for time immemorial. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I get it. And how does the structure of the church work? Like, in terms of people wanting to study, they go from this level to that level. How does it work?
It's simple. Someone comes into the temple and they can either decide to just hang out for a while and talk to us, or they can decide to undertake the studies, in which case they will begin with the initiates program, which I mentioned before. It's more or less self-study, but then, as I said, there is the IP team who are doing a bang-up job with that, and they help the initiates, get through the program, at the end of which they can be taken as an apprentice by someone who's been a knight for a while, and who will then teach them how to live according to the doctrine, and who will give them lessons, which will, show them, how one can approach a situation from various perspectives. At the end of the apprenticeship, the mentor will then propose the Knights Ball that the pupil is ready for becoming a knight. The Knights will deliberate on it, and they will accept that person or not. Once one becomes a knight, there's still a program of study thereafter, which is just lesson upon lesson upon lesson of learning how to be an effective knight. And those studies are it's not a set program. It's basically done according to whatever the learner needs to learn at a particular time. It's very loose with that. There's no reason why one should be focusing on a lesson about humility whenever really what they're having a problem with is leadership or something like that. So the order of lessons doesn't really matter so much. And then once they've done an adequate number of lessons and we consider that they're ready for promotion, well then they're given another degree and they're eligible for promotion to senior knight. That too, it just entails continuing to study, continuing to live according to principles, perhaps taking an apprentice and helping that apprentice learn to live according to the principles up through the time where they can be knighted themselves. There are a lot of avenues of service.
And how so, as you said, that they're slightly different in different parts. What you said in American Jedi, they're slightly different to what your church is as a whole. But what would you say has been the most interesting experience you've had as a result of Jediism?
My apprentices, they are their delight, and that for me has been the most wonderful aspect of being part of this organization, is helping helping these wonderful people become Jedi Knights themselves, and then watching as they start sharing what they have learned with others who aspire to the same. They're all really good at it. They're still very helpful. They're very respectful, resourceful people who are there to help people out and help people just understand things a little bit better, or maybe not maybe not crystal clear, but enough to at least provide people with other perspectives on things, which is really often all it takes. Being there, not telling someone how to do something, but then just being with them while they're sorting it out themselves. And that's essentially what that's been the most interesting aspect of it for me.
And what was so within you before our interview? You asked me a series of questions, and what have you found? So you've been interviewed before in regards to Jediism.
Yes.
What is the general tone you find in interviews? What are they like, and how? Yeah, what are the sort of questions you generally get?
Well, I guess it depends on which body it is. The vast majority of the ones that I've had have started out where they want to know how it relates to Star Wars, so I don't mind talking about that. It's like the fictional Jedi are sort of caricatures of what we are and what we aspire to be. Virtuous and just a little bit of a rascal, underneath. But then and then it moves on. When I've been interviewed, well, then I will always go into comparative mythology. I'll always go into phenomenology and philosophical undertones and even the overtones. That's just, I can't really share anything, from all the groups, and I can, only touch on what it's like in the Temple of the Jedi Order. What I basically do is tell it from my perspective, which is just that. I see it, as a combination of all religions. I see it as an amalgamation of, lots of different philosophical thought. And I don't even, exclude that which is contradictory. Because, as it were, when we were talking a little while ago about, the maxims and the teaching are all ideals or virtues that we aspire to, that we try to live up to. But as we all know, just by living day to day to day in the real world, well, then sometimes ideals collide. Sometimes they're not compatible. And there where you've got incompatible ideals, you've got an absurdity that has to be reconciled. This is what I tell the press. And of course, a lot of times they don't get. I've granted some interviews where they love what I tell them. And then, as I told you, also when we were talking over Messenger, I was interviewed there was one bloke here, in France, who got really cross with me because I didn't have anything to show her. So, that's, I think that a lot of times when it comes to the press and they ask for interviews, well, then they are wanting to reveal something which is a little more close to Star Wars. And we can draw parallels, but then it's not, what we do is not based on Star Wars. It's based on the underlying principles and the characters in stories taken from everywhere and from all time that have inspired, what became the Jedi Knight in Star Wars.
One thing that I am interested to ask you is so when you're at work or in jobs, or like what do you do as a job? What's your thing? What did you do before?
I taught for quite a while, for 7 years, I believe, and then I worked at the conservatoire, and now for the last 3 years, I've been in the role de gestion des ressources of the direction of It doesn't sound right in English. La direction de musique, where I'm the one who basically, engages and pays the bills for, four of the town, of the cities, four of the city's museums. So it's really, it's really uninteresting, to talk about that. I'm just an accountant, essentially.
Because I mean, you obviously, I'm sure that there's a few people that that have had found out about you being a Jedi,
Yeah,
and
I got outed actually. I gave an interview to the local paper in 2015, I believe. And the next day, there it was on the front page of Bien Public, which everybody in Burgundy gets. Where say there's a Jedi working at the Conservatoire de Dijon. It was kind of an interesting experience because I did have colleagues who came up to me saying, well, before we didn't really know, but then again, we did. And so, it was like that. I've not really had any reactions, no one has, no one's taken the piss out of me about it.
oh, that's yeah, because I've seen in a lot of movies, or you see in a lot of situations, you reveal something that's a bit quirky about yourself in some instances, and then people use it as a perfect excuse to go,
Yeah. Well, generally when people do that, it's because they're trying to, point the finger at someone else in order to feel good about themselves. With, in my case, I just, if they need to do that, I'll just let them. But, they'll come to a point where they realize that that sort of behavior doesn't work very well. What does work, though, is understanding people and, understanding why it might come at me like that, and then talking to them. And a lot of times, then they say, "Oh, that's not what I thought it was at all. This is really interesting." So, if someone can take the piss out of me, it's not the best way of saying hello, but then, it does work.
there's a Stoic saying of what I heard. If someone launches a very vicious attack on you, it's normally three reasons. It's either ignorance, anger, or it's ignorance, anger,
Envy.
or insecurity, or envy as well. But they normally those three things. Yeah, and insecurity comes from envy.
Right. But that's one of the things that we do as a whole is we try to attenuate people's insecurity. That's something that we've got in postmodern culture all over. Is that there's no one who spends as much money as people who are afraid of things. So although there is good cause to be prudent, then irrational fears are just expecting things to come around every corner. Life just isn't really that dangerous anymore.
What? So, do you get some stupid questions on the Sith then as a result? Are you saying that people are ignorant and they say things like, "Do you have the dark side or the Sith and all that?" Do you get questions like that?
Sometimes, and of course, what I tell them is that everyone's got their dark side. I mean, that comes directly out of Jungian psychology. That's one of the things that Star Wars didn't do very well. They made it a very Manichaean story, where it's a story of good versus evil, where there's some very clear lines between someone who is good and someone who is not. And essentially, if we wanted to go back to what we were talking about with the abuse of power, well then that's what the image, that's what the metaphor of the Sith is someone who will abuse that power for personal gain, or for in order to hurt other people, in order to profit by it. But then that isn't really any different than any of us are anyway. in Jungian psychology, we talk about the shadow. The shadow isn't necessarily evil, but it's all those things that we don't put into the persona, things that we don't show other people, but then they are all still very real influences in our life. Most of them subconscious. I mean, I guess the most benign way of looking at it is, you see somebody drop a £5 note and you pick it up and you put it in your pocket. It's like lots of people would do that. Especially if it's someone we don't know. If it's one of our friends, we might give it back, we might not too. I mean, we've all got that ruseness to us. So we've all that. And on the other end of the spectrum, well, then I don't know if you know the trial of Adolf Eichmann that happened in 1961, but Adolf Eichmann was the bloke who was in charge of the German railway system under the Third Reich. He's the one who organized the death trains that carried millions of people to their deaths in the camps. Yet, when he was caught and brought to trial in Jerusalem in 1961, what they discovered was that he was not this hate-filled little troll. He was just an ordinary man who, at the time, he had that job and he wanted to do a good job. So even though he was very well aware of what was going on, and he's just one of those people who his being had been, he got rid of his entire moral fiber in order to serve the state. And that's what happens to any of us anytime that we will act unethically in a role like that, because because I have this job, I will do this thing which I know is not right, and that's why I'm very uncomfortable even with the institution of saying I would do this because I'm a Jedi. No, I do this because of me, and it's the Jedi have these ideals that I want to aspire to.
Yes, well, I think it links to what you say about like I don't believe in the Force because I'm not into Jedi's, but what I do agree with in terms of, because I read a book recently that says when you attach yourself to a certain ideal too much, then it's very easy for someone to attack you, and it's very like you're saying, if someone does this because of that, it's
inauthentic.
And it's very easy for someone to attack you, and you get very insecure. And often, like, it's when people, as you say, tell the truth to people, because sometimes we get into the routines, and because you're so attached to a certain image, if someone attacks that image, that really damages certain people, and it causes resentment for them. Because
that's why it should never become an ipsetic feature. It should never become an identity feature, because whenever that happens, well, then it becomes something which is a sore spot.
Yeah, it's just fake. Like the thing is, Game of Thrones is a great program, but someone like Jon Snow is a bit too well. The thing that makes Game of Thrones good in a way is it doesn't paint them as too perfect, but I feel like someone like Jon Snow, yeah, I think in certain situations, he's a bit too good to be true, I think.
Yeah, but if you want to go into a science fiction show that did I think, pretty good justice to, the manifold nature of human personality, and that would have been Battlestar Galactica. I mean, all those characters were, they had shining moments where you really fell in love with them, but then a lot of the times they were just bastards. And that's the way most of us live our lives. We cannot be good all the time. We have all got that dark side, and so what we have, which is our responsibility, whenever we feel that desire coming up, we want to, do the maybe not right thing, is to choose to do the right thing.
So. And also with a lot of people that they say do horrible things, like you see in movies, a lot of the villain is always the guy that's supposed to be nice, and it turns out, oh, he's the bad guy. And the thing they it's like with self-help gurus, they target and like marketing things. They say we give you your money back, and they target very vulnerable and weak people who want to believe in a fantasy like Jon Snow or Lord of the Rings. And then what they do is they prey on it and they keep pushing it further. And so with Jedi Ism, what you guys don't do, which is, as you say, it takes from a lot of other religions, is it's the way you conduct yourself. And you don't do it too strictly, but this is how we advise you to do it, and you should do it as much as possible for the right kind of life, in a way.
Keeping very much in mind, ethics, and also just what we can possibly know. It's like, look, we often operate under very false assumptions.
It's too, because I've seen that as well. Sometimes in some situations, I see people say, "Oh, this person's really nice," and that. But you can come on, if you look at it logically, you can clearly see that they're putting on an act. But it's the fact that you want to believe in a fantasy that you believe that person, and then.
Well, we often have those fantasies also about ourselves. I mean, that's another thing self-help, industry, thrives on. Is, basically they promise, oh, you too can be like this, whatever kind of, image that they're prescribing, or you're deeply flawed, and here's how not to be deeply flawed. In neither case is it very accurate. That whenever we want to change something about ourselves, especially if we blow it out of proportion, say, oh, I want to change to be, this wonderful, compassionate person. How can one actually make that choice unless one has already undergone the change? You can't decide to change yourself from being a flawed person to a not flawed person being the flawed person making the decision. Well, as it were, we're all, I wouldn't say flawed people, but we've got, we've got the capacity to act in ethical ways. We've got the capacity to empathize with others. We've got the ability to let genuine compassion grow out of that empathy. We have also got, we're also selfish. We are addicted to our comforts. I don't know how many of us would be able to survive in the wilderness. But that's okay. That's all a part of being a complete human being. And that's one of the things that I feel the Jedi path ought to include. It's not just, the straight and narrow path, but it's also sometimes getting lost and taking a trip through the brambles. And one of the things that I just very recently said is that, the path is strewn with a lot of error. And, the learning from those errors and learning how not to be just having life smacked in the face. That's part of anyone's job.
So, what do you feel? And this is a life advice in general, in terms of the whole thing as well, because you made a good point about self-help. Like it's hard to make change when you're already sort of insecure, making the decision to go there. But how can you actually perpetuate lasting change from the inside and out?
What do you mean by lasting change?
Well, just to proper change. Like in the self-help, they make you feel like you're going to change, but you don't.
I guess it depends on what change you want to make. But then lasting change strikes me as an oxymoron. Because if it's change, well, then it's not lasting. And if it's a character trait one wants to develop and wants to perpetuate, well, then certainly. But then that's very simply by practicing it. I guess it's sort of, in a way, like Aristotle's virtue ethics. If you want to behave according to a particular virtue, well, then when one finds oneself in a situation where that virtue would be practiced, well, then one would think, well, what would a virtuous person do? and do according to what we think a virtuous person would do. It could be that that's totally wrong. It might not be a virtuous person, but it's that trial and error, and just that constant trial and error, and trying to be good, and trying to be virtuous, and trying to be helpful, and trying to pay attention to other people's needs and their feelings, that eventually it becomes easier. But it's constant trial and error. Lasting change, I don't know what that would look like. I mean, I don't.
What do you feel is going to happen to the religion as a whole, or like the way everything's set up, considering with everything that's happened in the world at the moment? What do you think?
There's always things going on in the world, and I suppose that our way of life is a very periodic one. It's just going to define a particular era, and probably not even a very long one. But it will become something else, because the principles that we try to live up to, the principles we try to abide, they've been around forever. And they've been there under lots of different guises and lots of different, labels, and they're part of many different belief systems. So it's not necessarily so important that people in 50, 100, or 500 years are calling themselves Jedi. I'm sure they will not be, but they will be, identifying with some sort of symbol, because that's just a part of our human evolution, is our symbolic imagination, and how we use the symbolic imagination in order to give a framework to our existential narrative.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I think yes, I mentioned this before, it got cut off, but what I mentioned before, you mentioned a lady, who was involved in both Christianity and sort of Jedi Ism. How does that work as a whole in terms of working in two religions in a way?
No, because they're based on the same things. I mean, she does a bang up job with it. She's very loyal, very faithful to her Christian heritage, and because the principles are exactly the same, well then, there's no incompatibility there. It's a particular interpretation, by those who believe in other things, that one should be of only one religion, but I don't think one can be. I don't think that anyone can really be of one religion. One can practice according to a particular denomination, and that may influence one to deny the reality or the credibility of other religions, but I feel that's a misreading of it. I keep insisting on the fact that there's guiding principles that are the same in many religions. Most of them are, things like, love thy neighbor, be just, do no harm. Those things are the foundation of most belief systems. So one can easily be of two or more religions. That's why I answered the question a little while ago. It's something I consider myself, part of all of them, really. And there's something like 4,000 religions in the world.
Yes, it's incredible how many there are. One thing I would like to say is, yeah, it's been interesting. We've had some deep discussions, and I think you've made me more aware of Jediism more than just being Star Wars. So that's been achieved. But what life advice would you give to your younger self?
My younger self. I would probably tell them, I would probably suggest that I start paying attention to this sort of thing, you know, earlier than I actually did. But I would say to love as much as one can, to not hate, and to not take myself so seriously. To just relax. Life's good.
So that do you feel that people in their youth take themselves too seriously, and you feel that
No,
people
I don't know. Actually, most of the people that I know, most of the people I get on with are much younger people, and I see that sometimes we get into these very deep discussions about the way things should be, the way things are, and I find that they have, and this is my generation's fault, that they didn't get the guidance that they ought to have had. And so they're looking for a mythology, and the closest they can come to getting one is just popular culture. So when they see just how popular culture can have an interpretation which is much more universal, well, then sometimes it's a bit bewildering. And what I do is just, I'm there for them. I listen to them. Of course, they take themselves seriously, but what I try to urge them toward is being much more sincere than serious. Seriousness has a certain urgency to it, whereas sincere, it allows one to be more authentic and be more oneself. Um, it's very difficult these days. I find that young people have had an uphill battle trying to forge an identity, and the here in France, for instance, kids are expected to know what they want to be when they get out of school when they're like 11, and this is ludicrous. And so, the only thing that I can do for them is just be there, listen to them, and understand where they're coming from, and then try to provide some sort of perspective on what other avenues are possible. You guys have your work cut out. I mean, my generation followed along in the footsteps of our forebears, and we've left you a disastrous planet on all sorts of levels. Climate change, political, economical, and I guess one of the things that I would, tell young people is be very careful of, what seems important. And a lot of the times when we talk about the economy, well, then you ought to realize that that's as much of a religion as any other religion, to the extent where we're living in a time which is now, pretty much bereft of any kind of mythology or any kind of belief in a deity. And this isn't new. This has been, going on for hundreds of years since, the humanism movement started in like the 16th century. But it's certainly during the 19th century that, atheism took on, and, will be bereft of anything which is larger than ourselves. Well, then, we have to feel like we have to drive the ship. And that now has left people, rudderless and clueless. And we've replaced that with pseudo-cultural institutions like, financial system. I mean, if you think about it now, if someone does not believe in economic growth, well, then you almost consider them, a heretic. It's almost a blasphemy to say, we probably need to be more careful about, how we manage our economy. We probably ought not be, so prone to the growth mindset, and we should probably shift it to a resource-based, system rather than a financial one, a scarcity one. So basically, what I guess I would tell young people is just, have hope. And the young people that I've known, they do have hope, and they represent a lot of hope to me. And to the ones of my generation who are a bit wiser, they would represent hope to them too.
Let's see what happens. I mean, things seems to be getting a little bit better with the virus, and I think things will change for the better when this is all over.
When what's all over?
When the virus, when we can when the virus is over and we can go out without wearing masks and worrying about catching it.
That's not the only thing that's going on right now. And I'm sure that things are going to, get better, and then not so much better. And it's all a part of it. History is not linear. It's all a lot of variables going on at once. It's sort of like when you have a piano and you put your whole arm down on the keyboard. That's, there are some notes that stick out. And of course, this instance with, the virus and the pandemic, that's just one of them. The virus is not going to be over, ever. It's something we're going to learn to live with. We may come up with a vaccine. But, things like viruses, illnesses, addictions, things like that, they're going to keep going on. And it's just all part of the tapestry of, what we call life.
It's just one of those things, eh? But look,
Well, we're actually quite fortunate that it came along when it did, because certainly it's been catastrophic for those who have been quite ill, and those who have lost people that they love. But then there are other catastrophic things. There are other tragic things that take as many lives, and we have to be just as careful about them. So we are not focused just so much on the sanitary conditions right now. We've got to focus on all of it. I'm sure that there will come a time whenever things aren't going to be quite as tense, but until then we'll make do with it.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. It's a very metaphysical thing to say. It is what it is.
Well, I mean, a lot of things are the way they are, and sometimes you can't change. You just got to accept them what they are, and then you have to adapt to them.
Yes, precisely. But then say it is what it is, or they are what they are. Well, then the focus is on the verb, and that is metaphysics in a nutshell.
Yes, I think so. Right. I just want to say thank you for appearing on the podcast.
Thank you, Marvin, for having asked me to do.
And yeah, hit me up with any social media handles or anything you want to plug, and I'll put it in the description. And just stay safe and well, and take care.
Sure. You too. Take care of yourself, lad. Bye.
Bye. 1 second.
I can never figure out how to turn it off either.